So welcome to the SharePoint Information Governance Mismatch session. Hopefully the term mismatch will become obvious to you as we go through. But it's really about, this session's about, who wins? Is it the law, legal, compliance? Is it the technology, for the most part SharePoint? Or is it the business? We've got these three potentially very different kind of views on what information governance actually is. So my name's Ant Clay. I'm founder and CEO of Soulsailor Consulting. There's my contact details, so if you need to get hold of me at all, either to tell me that you didn't like the session or to ask for help or to tell me that you like the session, then feel free to get in touch. I'm a part-time SharePoint information governance product owner at Zurich Insurance at the moment. And I'm also a combined knowledge trainer as well, doing their information governance and requirements courses. Soulsailor Consulting is a small micro consultancy. It's about this big actually, because it's just me. And we're focused very much on enabling organisational value by positively disrupting technology projects. I had to put the positively disrupting in because people thought I just came in and threw servers out of the window and caused havoc. I do cause havoc, but try and do it in a kind of positive way. I'm also an author, or rather a self-published author. So I've written a book called SharePoint Governance Manifesto, which covers governance on a wider, higher level sort of basis. And I've got a couple of copies of that book, so any good questions through the session or at the end, and you can have a copy of the book. So this session has come about over the course of a few years, through my work doing information governance, but also sort of during conversations with various different organisations that I've been working with, and really seeing, I guess, how difficult actually information governance is. Who here is doing information governance at the moment in either the clients or in their own organisation? Yeah, try. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think, certainly when I first stepped into this kind of area, information governance seemed like it was kind of straightforward. There's some, depending on your organisation, there might be some laws, some reasons why you need to apply information governance, or you might be just trying to keep control of your information. But it all kind of seemed fairly straightforward and relatively easy to implement. SharePoint has some features. They've certainly evolved over the last few years. But when I started really digging down into it, what I was finding was really that looks are very much deceiving. It's a bit like the iceberg. The easy bits we can see, but actually there's a lot more complexity, a lot more challenges, I think, underneath information governance that potentially we're not aware of. And certainly I wasn't when I kind of first started on this journey. But it may be that you guys aren't aware either. So this session really, what I want to look at is really kind of to open your eyes to certainly some of the experiences and things that I've found over the last few years around information governance and the things I've learned, and kind of hopefully get to a point where I'm not going to be able to give you an answer, because I'm sure you're in a huge range of organisations, you guys. But what I hope to do is steer you on the right sort of path. Hopefully, give you some questions to ask, some things to think about, and at a really, really high level, I've got some thoughts as to how you can put tools and best practices together to potentially solve some of your information governance challenges. So I won't leave you hanging completely, but I'm definitely not going to solve it all. But hopefully we can start getting there. I'm going to make the assumption that you know why you want to implement information governance. That is a big question. But I think for most organisations, whether you're highly regulated or not, there is a need for some level of information governance. So we're not going to go through all the really in any detail all of the things around why you need it and a business case and how you justify that. I'll leave that to you guys. But what we will do is potentially raise some questions around that might actually drive your why and your project reasoning. The scope of this session is, to some extent, a lot of the experiences around sort of very large organisations and even global organisations, but I think a lot of what I'll talk about applies to sort of small and medium companies as well, just maybe not quite so stringently and maybe not quite as much. Obviously, we're in a SharePoint conference, so this applies to SharePoint, Office 365, SharePoint Online, things like that. But you could equally think about some of the questions around that we'll talk about in terms of other technologies as well. And for the most part, I'm going to be focusing on the kind of softer kind of systems. So not necessarily hardcore records management solutions, because to some extent, the governance is kind of baked in. So it's more around your collaborative information, your knowledge, those kind of things. So I think that's where the real challenges happen, because in a collaborative system, your information could be anything. Yeah, it could be really, really important records. It could be, you know, the team org chart. It could be the paintballing poster for your team outing. It could be anything. And we've got to look at our information and try and work out how do we govern that appropriately. Some of the kind of thoughts have been stemmed by conversations with companies like Zurich. As I say, I'm working with them quite a lot at the moment, but also various other large organisations that I've talked to and had engagements with, and some of you are in the room today as well. Just understanding all these different things, because that's 4 sectors, there's other sectors, and everybody's got different kind of drivers as to why they need information governance, and different laws and regulations and compliance issues that they need to deal with. But it's complex across all of them. Yeah. So who wins, do we think? Is it, in information governance, when we're trying to apply information governance, is it the business that wins, or is it going to be the technology? What do you think? Both? What? Both? Business? It's a draw. Sitting on the fence there. So, yeah. I just kind of like, if you think of a project, you can either be business, there's various degrees. You can either follow and deliver what the business want and what the business say, or what the technology delivers. Yeah, so SharePoint has some information governance things. The business wants some information governance things. Which one is going to, when you've implemented it, which one's going to win?
It depends who's reporting to where the information management function is. Sometimes it's within IT and sometimes it's within legal.
Sure.
Or elsewhere.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. What were you going to say?
If the business isn't winning, then something's going drastically wrong, because it's a tool, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool to enable a business process or what have you. The technology's winning, something's going wrong.
Quite possibly. Well, we'll come back to this in a minute, but I think the real winner is the law. Yeah, compliance and legal, because that's really, there's lots of stuff that you need to do and you want to do from a business perspective, and that's fine. And you're right, let's face it, a lot of the sessions I do, and guys know me, business should win all the time, absolutely. But actually, legal and compliance and the law and EU regulations and things like that, that's what really, really matters, especially in a highly regulated organisation. And we'll come on to why I think that is a bit of a challenge in a little while. So very quickly, we'll run through some definitions. So Wikipedia, and I apologise, this is quite a long thing, but Wikipedia says it's the set of multidisciplinary structures, policies, procedures, processes, and controls implemented to manage information at an enterprise level, supporting an organisation's immediate and future regulatory, legal, risk, environmental and operational requirements. So Wikipedia doesn't mention anything about business value or people being able to actually use the systems after you've whacked this information governance on there. For a lot of my clients, information governance to them is taking control of their information. Potentially it's maintaining a reputation. If you don't want sensitive documents getting out into the public. It could be around not getting fined too much, or maybe not at all. Reducing the hassle. Legal and compliance. Has we got anybody from legal and compliance? Sort of. Okay, I'll half offend you. I apologise. But legal and compliance. They have quite potentially a black and white view. There is laws. There's stuff that they have to do, and they will force IT and business to work in that way. Quite rightly, because they're protecting the interests of the business, but that's kind of painful, for the information management part of the business or for IT. And then there's my definition as well. So generally, from a governance perspective, I define governance as being, the activities you need to safely steer your organisation towards its vision and goals. And the safety bit is the kind of legal and compliance bit. Vision and goals is hopefully the kind of business value. And from a pure information governance perspective, it's the wide scope of activities that cover, in my mind, both information architecture and information management that ensure that any content you have, in whatever form it is capable of adding value to the organisation and supporting your business's outcomes. So in my mind, it's we've got information, along with people, it's our most important asset, and so we need to make good use of it and get value out of it. Otherwise, what's the point of having it at all? Does that make sense? Feel free to shout out if you've got any questions or comments as we go along, but we'll take questions at the end as well. So some typical drivers around information governance, and there's lots of them. There's HIPAA, the health insurance portability thing. There's Freedom of Information, Data Protection Acts, Sarbanes-Oxley, Safe Harbour. There's German Workers' Council. Lots and lots and lots of legal and regulatory compliance rules and guidance that we have to cater for. And a lot of that is what drives, I think, the complexity in information governance. On top of that, you've got the usual things like, we can't find anything in our organisation. We've got too much. We've got file shares that we've had for years and years, and we've got content, with the last modified date of 1987 and things like that, and nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows whether it's important or not. So there's all of those drivers as well. Does that make sense? Is there any other key things that you think? What drives your, those of you that are looking at information governance, what's driving your sort of focus on that? No focus at all. Reputation, yeah.
Reputation, operational risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Operational risk, reputational risk.
Subject access request in our case.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. So what's the impact of not actually doing information governance? Because, it's to some extent, certainly I've been into clients whereby there is really no information governance at all. I mean, some of the...
Time bomb, isn't it?
It can be a time bomb, absolutely. Potentially, there's very heavy fines. There's definitely, a risk of not getting value out of your information, reputational damage, as you've said, and potentially, loss of business. If you don't manage your information correctly, if you don't get value out of your information, then you're not being as effective as an organisation as you could be. If you're letting documents leak out, if you're not responding to access requests, then all of this can cause a lot of pain and a lot of problems. So it is an important issue. So what are the sort of questions that we need to ask? This is kind of like your information governance requirements gathering kind of thing. First thing really, I think, is what is the scope of what you're talking about? I know the focus of this conference is SharePoint, but more and more when we talk about SharePoint, we actually don't just talk about SharePoint, do we? We talk about things like OneDrive for Business. We talk about Lync, Outlook, Yammer. All of these things are starting to become quite entwined. And we've all, pretty much all, I'm sure, have got file shares. Yeah, hands up if you've got file shares in your business still. Yeah, pretty much everybody. Hands up if they're a mess. Yeah, mine's a mess, and it's just me. I'm my own worst enemy sometimes. So we've all got these file shares, and we've got content in lots of different systems, and we need to kind of get control of it. So the first thing really is, what are we going to do? Are we just going to focus on, say, SharePoint, or are we going to look at moving our content from file shares into SharePoint? What approach are we going to take? Yeah.
Surely a governance framework should be agnostic of systems.
It should be, and we'll talk about this in a minute. At a high level, it is. The Data Protection Act covers everything. Absolutely.
If, for example, other tools may have different logical units that become important. So,
Yeah.
site collection sites, those logical units where you apply governance may be different with different products, right?
No, absolutely.
Build products, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely a whole heap of global things organisation-wide things that you need to cater for that apply across everything. But when you look at just SharePoint, I think you'll find just because it's a different technology to a file share or to your CRM system or your finance system, that you have to take those rules and then look, how can I apply those to this body of information? You know, what rules do make sense to it. So I think you do, although you're right, it is a global thing, an organisation-wide thing. I think you do have to apply it at a more local level, a technology level.
Do you not find, though, that organisations tend to have a different set of rules, what they want to apply when you're building a new piece of infrastructure like SharePoint? All of a sudden, they'll say you've got to have all this governance in place, completely ignoring the file shares and the mess that they're in and the mess of access rights. And they want one rule for a new system and they'll completely forget.
Yeah.
So if you want to be in compliance, you've got to look at all systems.
If you apply the compliance consistently, so we find that system A and system B released at the same time, they just pick on that one and never do that one, and then so therefore people start using that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The one with less compliance and governance on it because it's easy to use. Yeah, we will come on to that. So yeah, organisations are terrible for putting a system in, doing the best they can, then putting the next one and it being different. Absolutely. You're right. You do need an approach across your systems, and every time you upgrade your system, every time you create a new system, you should be applying it in the same way. But the reality is, a lot of this is heritage stuff. It's legacy. It's file shares that have been around for years. And we'll talk about really, some of the approaches. I mean, they're fairly self-explanatory, but we'll talk about some approaches to file share migrations in a bit. I don't want to get down into that level, but we will mention it. So if we assume that we're going to just for the moment focus on SharePoint and that's where we're going to apply governance, even though we may well have to apply some governance to file shares and maybe delete some stuff off file shares before it gets migrated perhaps into SharePoint, then some of the things that we want to think about are, which SharePoint bits are we going to govern? SharePoint is a huge, huge platform. Yeah, we can do a lot of different things. We can build business apps, BI. We can do records management. We can do collaboration. We can do a huge amount of things. So we've got to think, okay, what are we actually going to apply our information governance to? Because that will have a huge impact as to what the technical solution is. Is it everything? All site collections, all subsites, they're all going to be governed. Do we just focus on pages? We're going to in our scope, are we going to include the social side of things, maybe news feeds, Yammer, things like that? We're going to look at libraries. Is it just document libraries, or are we going to include picture libraries and all the other sorts of libraries that we've got? We're going to get down to sort of lists. Is a list a piece of information, or is each row in that list a piece of information that needs governed? Or is it any attachments to that list item? Depending how you as an organisation want to see information governance and what you want to govern will really, really impact the solution that you're going to apply. So again, what do you think? Out of that list, what are you guys thinking that you will be governing? Any thoughts?
Try and keep it as high a level as you can, don't you?
Yeah.
The management becomes too much.
Yeah. Anybody else? All of those, yeah. Yeah, and the challenge is actually to actually govern SharePoint as a whole thing, and we'll come on to why it's difficult. I think it's almost impossible. Yeah, and we'll talk about why in a moment. So once you've thought about what SharePoint bits, again, it's like from a business data perspective, what are you governing? Is it anything on your file shares that you're going to get control of and then move into SharePoint? Is it the collaboration stuff? Are you going to do records management? Are you going to govern your social bits? Whether that's news feeds. Email. I mean, I don't want to talk about email because email's a whole other thing. But absolutely, email's part of that. And is it you've got email as a system, but you've also got people that are dragging and dropping sort of emails into SharePoint. Should they be governed? So there's a lot to think about. Absolutely. In fact, there it is, email, voice. As soon as you start maybe, doing governance around voice and stuff and recording phone calls and things like that, and then do you do the same with instant messages? How do you differentiate between, asking somebody if they want a quick cup of coffee versus, passing on, client data to another person in the organisation? What about application-generated content? So a lot of people on file shares, they've got systems, quite often legacy systems that dump down files to a file share for whatever reason. You know, whether it's to be printed or to be edited or whatever, and then maybe suck it back into the system. Do you govern that stuff even though it's temporarily on a file share? Does it need governing, or is the system managing that? So the lines of delineation between what should be governed and who should be governing it can be quite blurred. And then we come on to, and the real kicker for me is, if you're just in the UK, and that's all you do businesses in the UK, I think you've probably got an easier time. It's not going to be easy, but you've got an easier time at applying information governance. Yeah, because you will be subject to, you know, maybe EU laws. There will be things that are laws and regulations in the UK and for your sector. But the challenge happens when you're a global organisation or a large organisation. You've got these global, high-level policies and procedures that you're implementing, and then you've got local laws and local requirements. So Jersey or Germany or Spain or France or, you know, any of these countries that are then saying, actually, although you've got these laws here, we're special and we've got these different laws. Yeah, we've got these other things that we want to, yeah.
Does that sort of end up becoming the lowest common denominator? Because it's what I find is that Jersey's got the strictest laws, usually the US, and everybody has to follow what the US FSA is saying.
So, yeah, originally I was thinking, yeah, that's great. We just cover our bottoms by just using that lowest, that lowest denominator. The challenge is there's a lot of laws whereby actually you've got to have deleted your information at a certain point for a certain reason, you know, right to be forgotten. You can't hold it longer than you actually need it. So if you've got local laws, you know, Germany or Spain will have one. You know, you can get rid of information after 3 years. If somebody else has got, their law is get rid of it after 5 years, you can't do 3 years because that's wrong. You can't do 5 years because that's wrong. So you've got to start thinking about local processing. That's an interesting one, because I'm finding that although that in theory is the case, in practice it's not. It's where it's used, not where it's stored. So, you know, you've got your data center in, you know, Switzerland. Doesn't mean you're just governed by Swiss law, unfortunately. Yeah, where it's accessed, where it's used, where it's processed. Yeah, in effect, then you're back to global ideas and local laws. So this is, to me, this is the nightmare, because if we're saying that wherever we implement SharePoint, you know, if we have one global collaboration platform, we've got to think about the big laws that apply to everything, yeah, and we've got to think about these local laws. So if we think, you know, site collection level, yeah, what if there's a site collection that's being used by 2 different countries? It's a collaboration platform. It's bound to be. You know, you're going to have projects that are global projects. How do we manage that? And I think this is where it gets really, really complicated. And it's very hard to kind of dumb things down and take that lowest common denominator, because it's always conflicting. Yeah, does that make sense? So data classification. Who classifies their information in their collaboration system or any other system? Yeah, some people. Yeah, few of you, some of you. Okay. For those that aren't, should you be? People that were shaking their heads, should you be classifying it? Well, I think you probably should. So, you know, quite often people have, you know, public or open, internal use, confidential, those kind of data classifications. Does that apply to a specific document? Or, you know, in your organisation, is it to a body of content or a type of document? Any thoughts? Sorry? Classes of information. Anything else? So what I certainly find is that actually it's almost down to the document level. Because if I've got a project charter in the UK, or say, and a project charter in a different country, or even in a different department, then my project might be, you know, internal use, because it's just, you know, bog standard SharePoint implementation project, not a problem. But the project charter in Germany maybe for a new building, or for, you know, a new piece of business or a merger or acquisition. So it'll have a very different data classification because it is, in effect, very different data, even though it is just another project charter. So it's really hard. You can't classify based on the type of information. And as we'll see, I don't think we can apply governance based on the type of information because it depends on where it's being used and how it's being used. Yeah. Now, I know Microsoft don't use that kind of classification. They use business impact. Yeah, sort of low impact, medium, high, and I don't think they have an oh crap level, but it's that kind of, if this information gets out, we're in serious trouble, boys. Yeah. And that's a good, that helps from an end user perspective because it's about the business impact. Confidential, what does that mean? What is confidential? I could tell you guys something confidentially in this room, or I could tell the whole conference something confidential, or me and John can have a quick conversation and I'll tell him something confidential. Confidentiality is a weird thing. It doesn't kind of map directly to how many people or who has access to it. Business impact is a little bit easier for an end user, certainly, to think about because it's like, low impact is your kind of internal use, open, doesn't really matter if it gets out, we're not going to get into too much trouble, but the high and the oh crap level, that stuff needs to be secured, needs to be looked after. It's not meant to be left on a printer, printed out, it needs to be looked after. So the impact of data classification, I think, really, really does differ depending on the scenario that you're in. There isn't this one-to-one mapping of highly confidential means 5 people should have access to it. It could be the whole organisation, but it's highly confidential, so look after it. It's kind of that business intent, really. In some organisations, highly confidential and confidential information, you shouldn't assign access via groups. Because you assign access via groups, it's quite easy to add another person to a group. Is that group being used elsewhere? So certainly in at least a couple of organisations I work with, at least highly confidential, and in some cases confidential, you actually have to add individuals to have access to it. So at any point exactly who has access. And it kind of makes sense, but from a management perspective, and from a SharePoint perspective, that's quite difficult. And it kind of almost goes against what SharePoint, certainly if you're using it in a collaboration kind of scenario, what it stands for. If we're starting to have to think at every single document, right, who should have access and doing individual access rights, we all know what kind of a mess that can get into. We use groups and we do it at a higher level because it's simpler to manage.
Is that because you don't trust at that point your domain administrators? In that scenario, when you're saying add them directly to the groups and not via AD groups, is it because of the technicians?
No, it's more because if you add, somebody that's got rights to add somebody to that group could, if they don't understand where that group's applied, add somebody that shouldn't have access to it, like an external contractor or something like that. So because it's a group, it's harder to see that. If you're adding individuals, you know damn well who's got access to it. So it is that kind of trust, but it's human error. It's not a lack of trust really. It's that the fact that the group might be misused in some way.
Maybe that you're in a situation where the technicians, server admins don't have access to the SharePoint groups. That's what
Yeah. Server admin access is a different kettle of fish. Yeah, definitely.
Can you give us your experience as to what percentage of the total information would be highly confidential?
It really does depend. And the challenge with data classification is what I'm finding is that more and more organisations are doing that at a document level. So rather than saying this library or this site collection is highly confidential, it's actually within this project, actually some content is confidential, some is actually public, some is internal use. Because you might have a project that's working on something, you've got some white papers there, they're not going to be confidential. They're going to be open or internal use. So you end up with this mismatch. This mix of data classifications within your site, which is really, it goes against kind of SharePoint, and as we'll talk about later, it goes against the way a lot of the SharePoint governance tools work as well, because it makes it much harder to manage. You're looking at every document.
So is a good principle not to mix information that are classed differently?
I think it's difficult to be effective, certainly in collaboration, and do that. So although, yeah, it'd be great to say, right, this site is just all our confidential stuff, the reality is the way we work and when we're collaborating, content is mixed. And it's really how you classify it and manage that access rights and make sure that, because if you take a project site, project collaboration site, you may have a whole mix of different data classifications, but you, as say the project manager, know that actually the people that have access to this project site, it's fine for them to see the highly confidential stuff because I trust them and I know who they are. It's the project team members. So it might be fine. Or you may say, actually, we've got this one document library with the highly confidential stuff in because we've got quite a bit of it. Or we may say, actually, there's only one document. It's highly confidential. Only me and my boss should see it. I'll secure that at a document level, but it's the exception. Yeah, so it kind of depends on how much content you've got and how different it is. Yeah, we'll come on to that, absolutely. But yeah, information governance shouldn't be an end user's problem, but from a data classification perspective, I think it probably is. So moving on, what about other things? So we've got data classification, but what about personal data? In most organizations, personal data should be confidential. So does that mean that you make an assumption that if you have personal data, you don't flag it, but you just make sure it's confidential? Or do you have a flag at some level that says this content is personal data and therefore make sure it's confidential? What do you do? Legally privileged, same again. Legally privileged means that, content that's legally privileged can be exempt from legal hold. So if you're applying potentially legal holds to your information, you need to know which content is legally privileged so you withhold that from your legal hold process. SOX compliance, data pertaining to minors, highly confidential if it's in a lot of organisations. So you have to secure that. So you have to understand what that context of your information is. So it becomes more and more complex. And the big challenge for me, certainly from the organisations I've been talking to, are the business definitions. Yeah. So what does your business define in terms of information governance? I've seen a document that basically said anything to do with the business operations was deemed to be a record and should be deleted after X years. And their definition of a record should be read-only and shouldn't be able to be deleted. And then you read the definitions and you look at what they say, business operations, and their Yammer content basically fell under the scope of being a record. Well, I mean, it's not a record, is it? You can't lock Yammer and you can't make it read-only and you can't treat it as a record. So you have to... They do? Okay, yeah.
It's turned into an email and it's stuck into work compliance storage.
Okay, yeah.
So they have found a way to do it.
Okay, no, that's interesting. But that's a heavy burden. Yeah. Okay. No, thanks for that. But business definitions really do matter. What is a record in your business? What does it mean? Does it mean that it's read-only? Does it mean that it can't be deleted until a certain point in time? Or does a record just mean actually it's a published version? It's a V1, a V2, a V3, and that's a record. What behaviours do you have? Should you delete it? Should you delete it after a certain period of time? So those definitions can drastically change how you govern your information. What's a business record? So we've got these formal records, and quite often they're the things that your legal and compliance team have told you should be a record. Yeah? But then as a business, you've probably got something that covers really important information. Your HR policies, things that are, from a business perspective, really, really important, but potentially have no legal ramifications. So how do you define those? Is there lots of different types? Is there different retention periods? And then what's a non-record? Or the rest of the information. And a lot of that is what's going to be in your collaboration site. There probably isn't going to be very many records, but there may be, especially if you're going from file shares and you're migrating content from file shares into SharePoint. Yeah. So the whole challenge of all of this and defining what's a record and what's not a record and what those behaviours are, because really, for most of us, we're scared of deleting stuff. How many people have got, in their email archive stuff from 5 years ago? 10 years ago. However long. Yeah, we do. And it's the same with file shares. And it's the same with SharePoint content. Because we don't know when we should delete it, we don't delete it. And it has been in the past the easiest thing to do. Just don't delete it, because then at least we can't get told off because we've deleted it. But there's more and more legislation that's coming in that's saying, actually, you need to delete this because if you're not using it, if it's not part of your business, you need to actually get rid of it. The right to be forgotten says once the business purpose for that information is finished, you need to get rid of that data. You shouldn't hold it. So you need a consistent approach to holding that data and understanding when to delete it, so that when you get audited and they go, why have you deleted that document? You can say, because our policy is this and it applies across all our information, and every third Tuesday we delete a certain type of content. Yeah? Because you can't just manually delete stuff. You have to be able to prove that when you've deleted it, it's consistent. So you can't just that customer complaint, you can't just delete that today, even though you should have kept it for three more years, because you know you're about to get audited and you're a bit worried. Yeah, you can't do that. Not that anybody would, I'm sure. Would you? No. So we need to worry about our deletions. Who's thinking about archiving their SharePoint content? Can I ask why? I don't mean, it's not, well, it is a leading question, obviously, but
Just wondering, in 5 years' time, what's it going to look like? There's going to be so much stuff up there that it'll be unmanageable.
Yeah. So a lot of people do archive because they want to declutter. Yeah. For some people, the argument used to be to move it onto cheaper storage. But I think certainly with SharePoint 2013 and general costs, actually, that argument is getting weaker. I think by the day, I was going to say, but by the year. Yeah. So I don't think that cheaper storage is necessarily a good driver. But if you're going to do it, how are you going to do it? Manually? Get people to archive content when they no longer need it, or you're going to have a system. You're going to have to think about how people get access to their archived information. Yeah. Or you're going to just archive it, and if nobody asked for it, then nobody needed it in the first place. And what are your rules? Do you archive after 13 months? 15 months? Is it 13 months after last modified, last accessed? Maybe do a review process before. Yeah, potentially. Maybe this is your review process. It disappears off somewhere. You go, where's my document? That's the review when you did need it and actually it shouldn't have been archived. In some organisations, what they're actually doing is just hiding the content. So rather than physically archiving it and moving it off, which means more infrastructure, more complexity to the solution, they're actually just hiding it and setting a flag on the content to say, pretend archived, eliminating it from the default views, eliminating it from the default search results. So actually you can't find that content. Yeah, but if you really need to, then you just do a different search, or search for stuff that isn't hidden. That declutters it out of the mind and the eye of the end user, but it's still in the system. Yeah. Then we've got disposal. So disposal is that really, I think, applies to non-records. It's the thing where actually I could delete this content whenever I wanted to. So very typical sort of collaboration scenario. But 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, 10 years, whatever your rules are, it will get deleted after a period of inactivity. And again, you've got to decide, is that from last accessed or is that from last modified? If it's from last accessed, then you've got to start switching on auditing, and it all starts getting a bit complex. But you need to kind of think about it. And again, manually or automated. It makes sense to do it automated, but that adds complexity to the solution. There may be legal or compliance reasons for doing it. And again, you need to get those timescales and that process embedded and be appropriate. And then, of course, records retention, which I won't kind of go into because it's pretty much the same thing. But that's for content. I can't delete it, but at a certain point, it is going to get deleted. Yeah. As we talked before, is it read-only or not? There's the other thing is, what is, when does your records retention period kick off? Is it at the point the document was declared a record? Or, as in a lot of cases, is it that, the third Tuesday after the policy was taken out or after the policy was closed? You find in a lot of financial organisations, the trigger point for records retention is very, very different. It's not when you actually declare it as a record. It's usually against some sort of, I was going to say, almost like what would you call it? I'm trying to think of the right word. A certain point. So, a certain point in the policy process. Yeah. So that makes it quite tricky to work out. So when is the right time? I don't think, again, I think, you do have to think about, is it last modified? Is it last accessed? What's the right time to kind of trigger this? Does it differ? Different information I have to keep for different periods, different countries. Thinking about usage cycles. So I had one client whereby the initial thought was that they were going to archive content after 12 months, and they were going to dispose it after 3 years of 3 years after last modified. And then when they did a bit of a thought process through the content, they found that actually there was a lot of content that they didn't look at for over 12 months. But it was, there was almost a cycle. So 13 months later or 12 months later, they would go back, look at something, and then create a new version of that document, maybe the review cycle. There was other stuff like legacy system documentation. So they went through the process, and all their legacy system documentation was going to get deleted because it hadn't been accessed, it hadn't been modified for bloody ages. But they still needed it, it's still valuable. But to them, it was a business record, it was important. So you have to play through these scenarios and make sure that you're not accidentally going to delete stuff or remove stuff or move stuff out of the way that is actually important to you and you need as a business to do your operations. So the next point to think about is, what are your typical information governance attributes? Yeah. I'm finding more and more organisations are attributing a data owner to their documentation, to their content. And in a lot of cases, that data owner is the person that will go to prison if you mess up. If it's a confidential document and it gets leaked, it's that person that will go to prison. Yeah.
You're talking about SOX stuff.
That's part of it, yeah. There's all sorts of...
What other rules or compliance and things, where would that come up?
Personal information, data pertaining to a minor. If that goes out, if there's a claim against the organisation, potentially that claim is attributable to the data owner.
So that's firms regulated by a specific act?
Yeah. Yes. Not just English ones, but yeah. Also,
Financial records are a good example in 7 years.
yes. Yeah.
So
So the purpose of data owner is it's the person that potentially could go to prison. That's just one example. It's a person that is in effect accountable to the information, and it's not usually just your CIO, CEO, or your chief information officer. It's normally a few levels down that, especially in a global organisation, because you've got these different rules. So the person in Germany, there will be somebody who's got very specific rules. I think what I heard one example of German projects, if it's to do with housing or buildings, you need to keep the project documentation for 50 years. Now that might have been an urban myth, but that's what I heard. But that's very different to the UK. So the project manager in Germany maybe, or the data owner in Germany, he is responsible for making sure that those governance rules apply to his information or her information. Yeah, so it's that accountability. It's the person that defines and states what those rules and regulations are. Yeah, we talked about data classification and the retention periods. They're all very important. The may contain nuts indicators, the personal information, all of those kind of things. Any other attributes? What else would you hold against a document, or what other attributes would you use to drive your information governance? Any thoughts? Any other things? Legal hold, yeah, absolutely, that's a good one. Whether that's an attribute, but yeah, you would certainly apply that, so you'd have to identify your content that is on legal hold, absolutely.
The big one in SharePoint is the content side, because that's where you attach the information management policy that does your retention and disposal.
If you take that approach. If you can take that approach, then yes, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so it's a big question, what do you need? And then the biggest question for that is, at what level do you store them? Do you store them at the document level? So certainly I think data classification you would, but some of the others potentially could be at document level, could be at site collection level. That whole site collection is going to get governed in a particular way. Yeah. So again, depending on the complexity of your rules and whether you're having to implement local rules and things like that, will depend on where you apply these and will change the kind of shape of your technology solution. So I've talked about data classification and security already, so I'll skip over that. But yeah, I want to come on to sort of why it's so damn hard, in my opinion, to implement information governance in these kind of collaborative scenarios. And I guess to some extent it's everything that we've just been talking about. So all of that stuff, if you look at your large-scale SharePoint solutions and look at all the different countries or different areas and maybe different business areas that you've got, taking all of those rules and applying them to your collaborative information is hard. Yeah? It might be relatively easy if you make that the responsibility of the person setting up the site collection, because then you're kind of saying it's your job, get on with it. But for a lot of organisations, that's not good enough. You need to try and automate it in some way so you have consistency and you don't have any mistakes. So I quite often use this kind of slide.
How does it work with self-provision and things like that sites?
So I still think it works, and I've come onto a solution. I've got some random person from AvePoint there just nodding next to you. I don't know what. Apparently he thinks he might have a tool or something to help. I think you can still self-provision, but you need to move potentially the governance decision away from that person that's provisioning the site. So yeah, absolutely, I agree. Where you can, self-provisioning sites, site collections, libraries, all of that is still good. But at some point, somewhere in the process, at whatever level you decide, you need to apply information governance. And ideally not the end user, because they don't care. I don't, apart from data classification, I don't think they care. So my view is that information governance doesn't sit in this kind of simple best practice scenario, because if it did, there would be one solution, we would all be using it, and you guys wouldn't be in this session, because it'd be easy. And I don't think it's in quite the good practice, complicated zone, because we have legislation evolving all the time. We have new acts coming, new initiatives coming. We have different countries having different rules. We've got lots and lots of things that are, I guess, making this more and more complex. So I see that information governance sits very much in this complex zone, the emergent practice. So we have to implement something because there's laws and regulations saying we must, but we constantly need to be revising and evolving these things. It's that whole trade-off of, you're trying to apply all this governance, but also you want your end users to use the system. You can't make it hard for the end users, because if they're not using it, they'll either just revert to email or file shares, or they, just tools down and not do any work at all. So we have to get the balance right, so we get the value out of SharePoint, but we're compliant and, we're doing the right thing. Yeah? So how do we do it? It's a challenge, yeah? We've got legal and compliance to think about. We've got supportability. So we don't want to customize the platform so much that when we go from 2013 to the cloud or to 2016 or whatever, that we can't upgrade. Yeah, we've got to make sure that it's still usable. Our users need to be able to find the content. They need to know where to put the content. Yeah, and we need to cater for our business information governance rules as well as our other business value areas and the legal and compliance side of things. So who's implementing? There's a few of you that are implementing or thinking about implementing information governance at the moment. Based on what we've saying, do you think you're implementing a very simple, high-level, very broad brush approach, or do you think it's more granular and more complex? What do you think? Go on. Complex, yeah. Yeah, John?
To be simple, but unfortunately the lawyers are involved.
Yep.
Right hassle.
They call it, right hassle, yeah.
And they're just complicating it at every opportunity.
Yeah. It is, but the reality is, although they're complicating it, they're probably right, unfortunately. Like, they're paid to be right, aren't they? So it is really difficult. I mean, of course, you could take the approach and do nothing.
Are we paid to be wrong?
Pardon?
Are we paid to be wrong?
Well, no, I didn't say that, no. We're paid to be equally right, but on a different day. Yeah. Differently right, absolutely. You could do nothing, yeah, and not implement information governance at all. And actually, in a lot of cases, a lot of large organisations have been doing that. because the fines, even though they've been substantial, in the millions, based on their annual turnover, is nothing. The hassle of actually implementing information governance is too much, therefore, sod it, we'll just get fined, we'll pay the fine, we'll say sorry, we'll do better next time, and not bother. Yeah, because it doesn't happen often enough for it to become a problem. Now, I don't think that's the right approach, and I think more and more, it's going to become, the fines are going to get bigger, and it's going to become more and more of a pain. So I think, organisations are going to have to step up and start implementing information governance.
Often they see it in the too hard box to implement, because the level of complexity to add full records, retention, disposal, and all the metadata that's needed to do it properly is, an order of magnitude more complex, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's not a small project. I've seen business case projects run to 3, 5, 6 months just to get the business case, and then the actual implementation projects and the requirements gathering just go on and on and on. These are substantial projects.
Shouldn't you get bond that you get investment?
But, yeah.
You get bond that you get an investment.
Yeah, maybe not the first time, but second or third time, absolutely, yeah. Now, it's not always difficult. If you think about your CRM systems, your finance systems, your HR systems, they kind of have governance built in. That's not, in a lot of cases, that's not where our problem is, because it's already there. If you think potentially about your intranet on SharePoint, that's probably fairly well governed. You've got pages that are relevant and then they're not relevant. You've got that life cycle. But that's because the systems do one thing. They've been built to do one thing. SharePoint, we kind of implement it here as a collaboration platform, we apply our information governance, and then somebody says, right, we're going to use it as a business system app, and they build something else on it. So the governance is no longer either adequate or appropriate.
And if you
Yeah.
look at things like disposal for data protection, often business systems actually have very poor governance because they don't comply with them.
That may be the case, yeah.
Quite often systems retain data to the life of the system.
Yeah, sure. I guess, and again, it depends on whether that system is homegrown or whether it's a bought off the shelf. And certainly off the shelf ones, not always, but quite often come with some level of governance built in. But the challenge is, we've got this platform, we govern it, then we build some new stuff and new use cases, and we're using it differently, and then we give external contractors access, and then we do, it becomes more complicated. So our governance needs to evolve, and that's why it's hard.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine.
What it just says to trigger something from thought, and that is continuous retention, hidden lists, workflow items using hidden lists. Do they ever get cleaned up? I mean, I know this
No.
is detail, maybe it's more session, but that's another place you may have hidden data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there is this whole, I think you have to approach it and go, we're going to govern our document libraries first, say, or with site collections, and then we're going to look at, okay, what about pictures? Is your organisation, do they have pictures? Should they be classified? And you kind of need to work your way through it. A lot of the legislation, they'll come down on you, they'll audit, they'll say this isn't good enough. But if you say, well, we're working on this, we've done this, now this is really nice and compliant, and now we're working on this, and you've got a plan and you're making progress, they'll probably leave you alone. It's the organisations that are doing nothing that get hit the hardest, or do things wrongly, or can't prove that they're being consistent. So as I say, I've already talked about this, but the cost of solving it has in the past not been enough, so people have just left it. So the challenges that we've got an evolving global approaches, we've got initiatives, we've got other acts coming on, we've got all of these things happening. The other thing is a lot of these rules are very rule-based. They're very black and white. You must do this in this situation. You must do that in the other situation. And quite a lot of it's got an old records heritage, which doesn't map very nicely to collaboration. Because collaboration, the content's constantly evolving. Lots of people are participating. It's not clear-cut. So that's the challenge with the theory, I guess. The practice, or when we actually implement SharePoint, the business kind of just want one solution. They don't want a solution for their confidential information and their non-confidential. They want to collaborate. They just want one place to go. They want that solution to support the complexity that we've talked about. The fact that they happen to be a project manager in Germany and their information needs governing differently to the guy in the States, they don't care about. They want the system to care about that. And in a lot of cases, we have conflicting rules. When you look at it globally, as we were saying, I think earlier, we can't just cover our ass by going to the lowest common denominator. We actually have to implement the individual rules as they actually are. Yeah, so that's a real challenge. And the business, really, as far as the business is concerned, information governance shouldn't be our problems as end users. Yeah, we should work as effectively as we can. We shouldn't have to think, right, this document, I think it's confidential, I think it needs to go in this site collection, but actually all the rest of the project work is over here because it's internal use. So if I want a full view of that project, I've got to go here and here and here. We don't want to be doing that. I mean, we can do things like search to pull all of that stuff together, but it makes it hard. So from an end user perspective, we want to try and move information governance out of their heads, except from potentially, as I said before, data classification, because that probably is still appropriate. But if the end user isn't doing it, and the system is doing part of it, where does that fit? And I guess the reality is it fits in that, as we said before, in the provisioning side of things. Do we apply the information governance rules at that site collection level, or site, or the library? As was mentioned earlier, the information management policies at a library level, is that where we apply these? If we do, then we need a consistent approach. We need something to say, here's the rules, that this document library needs governing in this particular way. So what have we got at our disposal from a solution perspective? Well, we've got our main platform, SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2013, whatever it happens to be. There's lots and lots of different solutions. Giml, ShareGate, Metalogics, some other one, AppPoint, that was it, AppPoint. There's lots of different tools, There's custom code, we can write our own stuff. The challenge is a lot of people go to the tool providers as the first port of call, and that's good. They're there for a reason because they can do a really good job. But what I'm finding is that they fit the more simple IG scenarios. So if your site collection needs to be governed in a certain way, or the whole of your collaboration platform needs governing in a certain way, just one way, one set of rules, these tools knock it out of the park. Awesome. Just apply it, it's done, straightforward. But when you're at the point of having to think library by library or site by site at that level, then it becomes much more difficult because these tools can't do everything for you. They're going to be focused on doing the lowest common denominator, the easiest thing across all of them. So we need to think of a way of managing that complexity. I guess the way to do that really is, I really covered over the following slides. The first thing, which I think is key, nothing to do with technology at all, is to have a vision. We're implementing SharePoint, we're implementing a collaboration platform. What is our vision for governance? What does it mean? Because once we've got that defined and we stick to it, then as our requirements come up, we can make sure they make sense for the platform. So we can make sure we have that alignment, which feeds on nicely to, I think you're doing goal alignment later, is it, John? Yes. Sorry. John Timney's doing a session on goal alignment, so go to that as well, because that helps, So the key questions we've got to ask ourselves are, do we build our own information governance solution? Do we buy a tool? Do we customize, or do we do nothing? And I think it's a combination, and it depends on how complex your scenario is and how many rules you've got. I mean, one organization that's got thousands of rules that are applied to different people that own information governance around the organization. It's impossible for a tool on its own to implement. We've got to do customization to kind of drive that. I would say analyze those rules early. Find out whether you've got 50,000 rules or whether you've just got 5. Because if you've only got 5, then maybe doing it at a site collection level will make sense. If you've got 50,000 rules across your global organization, you're going to need help. You're going to need to do custom dev to make sure that that can be applied. So understanding what those rules are will make a huge difference, I think, to the technology solution that you're going to implement. You may want to think about, do we actually just deliver a capability? So here's some tools, here's some custom code, here's an approach, now go for it. And let the different countries or BUs manage the complexity themselves. Or, as a lot of organizations do, you'll be looking for this one whole solution to fix everything. And as I alluded to earlier, is it business-led or IT-led? I've found that if you let the business lead this completely, it becomes very, very complex because they overthink it. They want to do everything. If you let IT do it, you'll have one set of rules. It'd be too simple. It won't apply. So you need to get that balance between what the business are trying to achieve and what the technology can achieve for you. So I think, as a real sort of straw man solution, if it's simple, just use SharePoint. Information management policies are great. They work. If it's getting a bit more complicated, you might need some tools to help with provisioning and things like that. And I think most organizations at least would start there. And then when you get into the advanced kind of information governance, where it is really, really complex and you're in maybe a global organization, then using SharePoint and custom dev and the information management policies to work together, and even using the tools as well to kind of provide that base governance is the way forward. So it's not easy. In a global large-scale organization, you're going to have to do a lot of work to get a solution that really applies information governance effectively across all your content. So think about consolidating your rules as much as you can. Think about pragmatism in your technology solution because you've got to support it. You're going to have to upgrade it at some point. As much as you can, trust your people. Trust that they'll put the content in the right place and make sure that place is governed. Yeah? Give a little bit of trust to your people. Don't go to prison. Try not to get big fines. Yeah? And try to protect your reputation.
Does personal liability insurance, if you're independent, how far would that protect you against data breach kind of things? Now, obviously, you've got negligence, which that's often the thing in the policies.
Yeah.
Contractor insurance, that sort of thing. Have you seen it covering that severity if you do implementation around breaching data, or is it the business that's responsible?
I think for the most part, there'll be somebody in the business that is responsible for that information. And it's that person that is responsible for making sure the governance is appropriate to secure that information. So it would normally go to, as we were talking about earlier, the data owner or that sort of person.
Cover you have criminal offences under state data protection.
Yeah.
So if you disclose yourself information,
Then you're going to get.
yourself, right?
Yeah. So coming to the end, try and stay at a high level. The problem with information governance is because it gets really, really detailed really, really quickly when the lawyers get involved and when you start thinking it and overthinking it, try as much as you can to keep it on that higher level. It's hard, it is difficult, but you need to try. And really, if you can govern at a site collection level and apply your policies there, that's nice and easy, it makes sense. But never go lower than a document library. If you're trying to apply information governance on a per document level, it's going to be a world of pain for the end user and it's going to be a world of pain for you as implementing a technical solution. And quite often, normally in these sessions, I talk lots and lots about business change, and that's the one thing that I'd like to finish with and just say, although I won't talk about it now, business change is huge. Yeah, if you are applying information governance at a really, really appropriate level across your global organisation or large organisation, it's going to mean people are going to have to do and work differently. Whether it's the people setting up those site collections, whether it's the data owners, the people responsible for that information, whoever it is, they're going to have to work differently. Yeah, they're going to have to be aware of information governance and what that means. So business change is a key one, especially if you're moving from file shares. Yeah, I think that makes sense. But moving from file shares into a well-governed, the Wild West of a file share to a well-governed SharePoint solution is a big, big step. So as I started with, it is an iceberg. Some of these sessions will have already happened, but this is a list of some, what I could see, other information governance related topics. So please have a look at those and go to those or have a look at them on the DVDs when they come out. But there's a lot of good content. It's a huge, huge subject area, and I wish you every luck. Thank you very much. Any questions?